Hello, everybody, and shalom from Tel Aviv. Thank you all for joining us today for another conversation of our series, Reading Here and Now, where we meet authors who wrote innovative books in our field. This evening is hosted by Mifrasim Institute for Psychotherapy Research and the Academic of Tel Aviv, Jaffa. Today, we host Daniel Kennefo on her new book, co-authored with Rocco Lobosco, The New Sexual Landscape and Contemporary Psychoanalysis. During this talk, you can write your comments and questions through the chat, and we will pass some of them to Daniel. Before we start, let me just tell you about our forthcoming events. On March 21st, we will host Donna Orange. On 21st of April, we will host Jane Abram and Bob Hinsherwood on their book, The Clinical Paradigms of Melanie Klein and Donald Winnicott. On May 2nd, we will host Leslie Greenberg, and on 30th of May, we will host Ofra Eshel for our Hebrew-speaking viewers. As you can see, we are so fortunate to host all these great thinkers in our series. We try to see who made a particular mark in our field and to invite them to talk with us and with you. My name is Goברין. I'm a psychoanalyst from Tel Aviv Institute for Contemporary Psychoanalysis and a director of doctoral track psychoanalysis and hermeneutics at Bar Ilan University. My research topic is mainly on the evolution of psychoanalytic knowledge. I am hosting this conversation with my colleague and good friend, Sharon Ziv Beyman. Hello, Sharon.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Daniel. Hi, everybody. I'm very glad to be here tonight. I have the honor to lead the activities of Mifrasim Institute for Psychotherapy Training and Research. We focus mainly on psychotherapy integration, but in the wide meaning of being integrative, which means to encourage dialogue between different therapeutic approach, between theory, practice, and research, and to evoke the therapeutic discourse around issues which stand in the center of our field. And we are very excited to have this meeting, this international meeting tonight. And I'm personally very, very grateful to those of you who are participating with open cameras, because it helps us to feel more close and less distanced from each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So I guess we can start. Psychoanalysis had always been ambivalent towards sex. As Muriel Demon notes, even Freud desexualizes when in his 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, he cuts heterosexual order out of the polymorphous jungle, and he continues cultivating sex as he proceeds. In the next generation, object relations, ego psychology, and self-psychology all contribute to the unsexing of psychoanalysis. Take Fairbairn, for example, his forceful verdict that libido is object-seeking, not pleasure-seeking. It brings objects into the path of desire, but suspends sex as a basic human need. Psychoanalysis gradually replaced the notion that sexuality is the foundation material of the human psyche with the idea that sexuality is a defense against relational and existential difficulties. In the new sexual landscape and contemporary psychoanalysis, Daniel Kennefo and Rocco Lobosco tried to make psychoanalysis central again to understand sexuality. They argued that psychoanalysis is uniquely positioned to examine the sexual sea change resulting in recent cultural and technological revolutions. One of their main theses is that the erotic is shaped in great part by early experiences that often include some degree of trauma. Sex between human beings is not only about the desire for love and union, physical enjoyment and offspring. Sex, they write, is also about psychologically expressing and working out the conflict associated with forbidden desires and historical suffering. Let me tell you briefly about this book. The first two chapters explain the changes that have taken place in sexuality within the last few decades, in which the view of gender has dramatically changed. Chapter 3 covers the explosion of internet pornography and the effects pornography has on the user. What does the pornographic imagination tell us about human perversity? How might early exposure to pornography affect a child's sexual and social development? Chapter 4 addresses the growing cybersex trend, specifically sex with online partners and sex with inanimate partners. A brief dialogue suggests a wide-angle view and underscores the importance of psychoanalytic theory and practice in understanding and treating patients who are negotiating new sexual and social terrain. I want to introduce Daniel now. Daniel Knaffo is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, a prolific author, and a popular speaker. She's also a professor at LIU Post in its clinical psychological doctoral program and faculty, and supervisor at NYU's postdoctoral program for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. She writes and lectures on many subjects, including creativity, trauma, psychosis, sexuality and gender, and technology. She maintains a private practice in Manhattan and Great Neck, New York. And she told us right now that because of the pandemic, she has not had a chance to celebrate and party her new book. So I guess we can a little bit compensate her for this tonight. So hello, Daniel. It's a pleasure having you with us today.
Hello, hello, shalom. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm grateful to Anel and Sharon for inviting me, and to all of you for participating and having an interest in my book. So I'm pleased to share my thoughts with you and to hear yours as well.
Thank you. Let me start with our first question. In this book, you suggest that psychoanalysis needs to return to have a deep concern with sexuality. Why?
Why? Because sexuality is a big part of who we are. And because psychoanalysis began with Freud's interest in sexuality. A lot of people have criticized him, called him all kinds of names, a mental pervert and all kinds of things like that because of his focus on sexuality. But sexuality is an important part of being human. It's an important part of being an animal, and we are human animals. It's a drive, and we eroticize that drive also as humans who have a large brain. So it's an enormous part of who we are, of what we do, of why we do what we do. And yet what you've noted in your introduction is that gradually over the decades, sexuality has become much less important, and we see less of it in psychoanalytic literature. And several people, including myself and my co-author, like Andre Green, who wrote a paper, What Happened to Sex in Psychoanalysis, or Peter Fonagy, who did a literature search on the PEP archives to look at words related to sexuality, and noted that there was a decline over the years in our speaking and writing about sexuality. So here we have this theory, psychoanalysis, for which sexuality was central, and now it's become pushed aside and replaced, and you ask why, replaced with more, as we've become more interested in infantile development and attachment and theory and relational theory, we've replaced the focus of our interest onto these areas and pushed aside sexuality. Now I'm saying, and some other theorists as well, is that sexuality is with us from the start, and we need to come back to it. We need to own it again and speak about how, not only how important it is in our lives, but also what has changed in our sexuality or in the ways we view our sexuality in the last decades. And that's the reason why I wrote this book, was to bring that back and to bring our focus on it. But in order to do that, I had to think about the changes even within my lifetime of how, sexuality and gender has been changing. And, I'm a professor. I have young people all the time, and it makes me feel older and older as my students seem to become younger, but they're not becoming younger. I'm becoming older. But I see changes in how they talk about sex and how they live their sexuality or not. And so I wanted not only to bring sexuality back in a major way to psychoanalysis, but also to talk about the changes that have taken place that we as psychoanalysts or psychotherapists need to be cognizant of when we're sitting with our clients.
So maybe, Danielle, as for the beginning, although we would like to get inside each of these changes, if you can review for our audience the main changes you identify in human sexuality.
Okay, well, I divided the chapters according to those major changes that I saw. The first one has to do with gender. The second one has to do with, I called it new forms of sexuality. Some of them are not new, but they've become more popular and more public than in the past. The third is internet pornography, which has exploded, and particularly in COVID times, it's gone up 20%. 1 billion users per day, 1 billion users on internet pornography. And that's not counting the deep web. And erotic technology. I've been writing, my previous book dealt a lot with technology and the technological advances and how that's been changing our lives. But advances in technology have intermingled with sexuality. And that's that's been a huge boom as well. And a lot of people, very few people are writing about that within our field. So those are the 4 areas that I see the changes in, and so I devoted a chapter to each one of those.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I noticed that in the book, there are a few concepts regarding sexuality that I will be grateful if you can help us to clarify. Okay. One is when sometimes you speak about sexuality and sometimes about erotics.
Yes.
What is the difference for you, or how do you choose the terminology? And the other issue is that especially in the chapter that review the blending and the fluidity of the concept of gender. On the one hand, you portray the contemporary sexuality as more permissive. There is no right thing to do. People can shape their sexuality and their gender in many ways. It's very fluid. On the other way, in the introduction and also when you write on pornography or even on other subjects, you assert, if I understand correctly, that sex is related to perversion. So what is the line between normality and perversion? What why do we still use the term perversion in relation to sex?
Okay, that's a lot.
Okay.
That'll take me an hour. I'll try to be brief. So the first question is much briefer. Sexuality, sex is a drive. Okay, it's a drive. We all have it. We're born with it. When I talk about the erotic, it's the humanization of the sexual drive. So we are humans. We have a large brain, a frontal cortex. We humanize what even our animal instincts, and so that's what I mean. So sex, you can just have sex, but eros, erotic life, has more to it than just the sex act. It's what does the sex act mean? It's just as simple as that. What does it mean to us? What do we bring into it? What do we associate with it, right? Where does it come from? Who, you know, how do we play with it? It's not so simple as just, I want sex, let me have sex. Sometimes it might be that simple. Then it's very drive driven. But everything that we attach to it as humans, the meaning of it, that is the erotization of the sexual drive. It's a human, it's a distinctly human feature of sexuality. And that's why it's so complex, right? Who are we having sex with when we're having sex? Which other figures come into there? Which taboos? Which are we breaking? Why are we attracted to forbidden objects? Why do we want somebody to hit us and that turns us on? Why is somebody attracted to, you know, children? That's the erotization of sexuality, all kinds of meanings. And for each person, it's very unique and individual and depends on, you know, what their own experiences have been, what becomes erotic for them. But sex is the drive, the act, okay? Now, your second question had a few questions in it. So, let me address the normal perverse. That's a big question, and it's an important question. How do we talk? A lot of people avoid talking about sexuality because, especially in today's climate of political correctness, we're tiptoeing and we don't want to be accused of anything, and it's very, very touchy when we pathologize anything. And the word pervert or perversion is a very loaded term. Now, perversion, my last book was called The Age of Perversion. So you can see that I go right into it rather than tiptoe. But what different people mean by perversion varies, right? Freud felt that we are all perverts, that there's a universality to perversion. And that when we're infants, everything, we're polymorphous perverse, right? What did he mean by that? Well, and anything can turn on an infant. You know, you touch them here, you touch them here, you touch them here, they're excited. Anybody can. It can be an old person, a young person, a male, a female, a trans, a dog. They'll get turned on. So that's what he meant by polymorphous perversity. And we have that in us from that time. What happens is society and education and civilization and culture come in and they step in. When you see an infant who's excited, they're waving their hands and their feet and the whole body, and they're making sounds and the whole body, it's a whole body experience. When you see an adult getting excited, right, it's like, you know, it's been constricted, except during sex, where there's some explosion and expression, but not the way a child did, an infant did. So what happened? What happened to our sexuality? What happened to our capacity for excitement, bodily excitement, pleasure? Society happened, education happened, religion happened. All of these constraints to our sexual expressions. So that's why Freud spoke about civilization and its discontents. We're discontented with all these limitations put on us. And therefore, he believed that sexuality was transgressive, was antisocial. In its nature, sexuality is antisocial. Why? Because what happens if everybody just followed their sexual desires? We can see how antisocial it is when we go online and look at pornography, because pornography is very politically incorrect. You will find everything that the woke people are saying one must never say, one must never do, one must never go on pornography. It's all there and it's being done and people are getting excited by it. In other words, our sexual drives are not politically correct. Our erotic longings are not politically correct. And that's one of the appeals of pornography, because it's a place that people can act out and play out and find others to do that with. So I'm still getting to the normal perverse. So on the one hand, we're all perverse, right? We all have this in us. But then if we all have it in us, how do we diagnose? What if somebody comes to us with a particular perversion? Well, I think we distinguish perversion from someone who has a compulsion, an addiction, a rigidity. It's like any other form of psychopathology. When somebody is stuck, when there's no movement, when somebody can only do things one way, when somebody can only get pleasure one way, and it's very rigid and very compulsive, and there's very little awareness of it. I think there's probably a large degree of self-deception going on and defensive-ness. That's when you see a more
but you know, Danielle,
there's also the part of whether somebody is harming someone else, right? And whether they're engaging in some form of sexuality that's not consensual. So that's a big part of.
But if I want to challenge what you said, I believe we will not say that someone who is having a very conservative sex in the same way all his life, in a very constructed way, is perversive.
Well, I might, but but maybe not everybody would. But I think you're right that some people might be having sex in the missionary position. Let's say a married couple, married, missionary position, socially acceptable, but it's exactly the same every single time. No creativity, no
perversion.
It could be considered a perversion if you talk to that person and they're frightened to move to the left or to the right. And also the perversion comes into what's part of the perversion is a sense of illusion, a dehumanization of another human being. Robert Stoller, who wrote a lot about perversion, talked about perversion as the erotic form of hatred, that there is an aggression and a vindictiveness and a hostility in perversion, that it's not just, sexuality. Now, all the way back from Freud believed that there's a sadistic and aggressive element in sexuality as well. The question is, how much? and how much dehumanization of another person, how much fragmentation. Usually we talk about, you know, sexuality as relating to a whole person, not objectifying the person, right? Being able to, you don't have to love a person to have successful sex. When I was training, people believed that, but that's not true. That's naive. They also believed that the more pathological a person is, the less their sex life would be successful. That's not true either. So we had a lot of misconceptions about sexuality, believing that healthy sexuality came along with a healthy personality. You have many healthy personalities who have sexual dysfunctions.
Can you, so if I understand what you're saying is that perversion is not a specific form of sexual activity like S&M, for example. It's the way the person treats that, if he's compelled to do it, if he suffers from that, if he does it over and over again in a fixed way, and of course, if it's not consent, if another people is suffering from it, that's a perversion. Is that correct?
That's part of it, yeah. It's complex. Perversion is a very complex topic, but yes, I think a lot of it is you know, but again, we objectify, even in the healthiest sex, there's an objectification going on. When, you know, let's say you're married to somebody for decades, do you always, every time you have sex, you see that person as a whole person? You're thinking of their personality. You're thinking, no, nor should you. There can be pleasure in objectification. If it's all the time, if a person is only relating to a certain part of a person, if there's a dehumanization going on, if there's this illusory part, that's what defines perversion. The non-consensual aspect is what will also identify with whom. Is it with a child? Can a child give consent? One would probably say no, right? Or even if they did, one wouldn't accept the child's consent, right? Or in rape, forms of rape, right?
But would you say, like, we'll get into the issue of porno because the book is very, you describe a lot of very important information regarding porno, but before we will get into it, is there a normal porno?
There is, well, again, we're back to the normal, abnormal. I prefer not to think in those terms myself. Because it's risky. Who decides what's normal, what's abnormal? You know, some people reduce it to, look, if two people agree on something and nobody's getting harmed, then that's fine. But sometimes people want to get harmed too. And then what? But who's to decide? And so it becomes very, very tricky. Is there a normal pornography? I don't know that I could even answer that. I don't know that I could answer that. I think, but that's a good question. When I teach advanced psychopathology, I ask my students to tell me who the most abnormal person they know is. And they all raise their hands. You know, I have this friend, man, is he wacko? I have this one, I have that. And then I ask them, tell me your most normal friend. And they have trouble coming up with it. You know, abnormal is much more easy to point at and say, you know, this is fucked up. This is messed up. Normal, what is normal? Do we even know normal? We can, and is it worth it You know, Christopher Bolas wrote about the normotic personality, showing us that you could be abnormally normal. And I think that relates to your previous question, Sharon. Can you be abnormally normal, even in the sexual area? Probably, yes, yes.
Daniel, despite pornography's tendency to degrade the subjectivity, you do not advocate an all-out opposition to pornography usage. Why?
Well, I don't like to take a moral stand unless it's very, very extreme. As I write in the chapter on pornography, so this is what happened in the writing of this book. I wrote the chapter on pornography. My co-author, who's male, said, you're too one-sided. You write too against pornography. And I said, okay, you write it. So he then started writing it, and his was worse than mine. He ended up more against it than I was. So then I had to bring it back to try to show some even-handedness. When you really study the effects of pornography, even though there's research, you know, that shows some couples use pornography to spice up their sex lives. Some people learn a little bit about sexuality where they can't learn about it anywhere else by watching porn. Of course, if you watch porn, you're learning a certain kind of sexuality, and that can ruin things for real life interactions. But there are a few people who are for it, but there's a lot of research. There's more research that's against it. I feel that I spoke against it in two ways. I have no problem with people using pornography to spice up their sex lives or to get ideas or just to get off. But the two ways where I feel it really can be detrimental is with children. When children are exposed to pornography, and the research shows now that children are exposed to pornography between the ages of 9 and 11. It's very young. They're becoming sexual beings, and when they're exposed to pornography, they haven't had the chance to develop their own desires, to know themselves as sexual beings with their own desires. Some may, but a lot of them don't. They haven't even hit puberty. They haven't even, you know, played around with their peers. And so I feel that what happens is that early exposure already dictates to them, this is what this is what sex is. This is what you're going to be excited about. And it replaces that developmental exploration within their own minds and coming to know themselves and know what they want and know what they're attracted to. And so in that sense, I think it can be very detrimental, and then hard to then bring the person back and say, well, what is it you want? And they don't know because they've been exposed to so many images, and images are very, very persuasive, much more than words. They stay in people's minds much more. It's much more adhesive. So that's the first area in which I think there's a detrimental effect of pornography. The second is addiction, that people become addicted to pornography. And then that becomes the way that they have sex with themselves and the pornographic image. And not only does it then become difficult for them to transition to humans, with a lot, I've treated quite a few, especially men, who have trouble with that transition. But 10%, 10 or more percent, probably higher, of pornography users become addicts. So And what we see today is that Viagra, that was a drug created for middle-aged and a little bit older men who lose their ability to maintain an erection, now is used to a large degree by younger men. 40% of male users of Viagra are under 40. They're young. It's not because of, you know, the problems that come with health deterioration and things like that. It's that they're having a harder time with their sexuality. And so on the one hand, this is what I'm showing in the book, there's this openness of sexuality in today's world. It's all over, and we live online, especially now with COVID. Everything is online, and things are sexualized. Sexuality is online. It's accessible. It's free. When I was growing up, if somebody wanted images of naked people, you had to buy a magazine. You had to go and you know, people describe, you know, the embarrassment and the shame, and a lot of people. But now you can do it in private. You can do it online. It's free. It's accessible. It's easy. So it's all over. On the other hand, people are having less and less sex. Research shows younger people are having less sex, and they're starting to have sex later than the baby boomer generation. Couples are having less sex than a few decades ago. So something is going on here, and I think these things are related. The overexposure to sexuality and all kinds of sexuality, and the less sex that people are having in real life. In Japan, a very technologically advanced society, about 30 to 40% of young people have given up on sex completely. There's a word for it, mendokosai. It's too much trouble, too much trouble. They've either become completely celibate, or they've replaced it with online, with robots, with dolls, so that's.
Danielle, do you view this trend as a problem or as a change? A problem or a change?
Both. Here I do have an opinion on this, and I do view it as a problem. I think.
What is the problem?
Well, I think these. I think we're moving away from human interaction in general, and sexuality is part of that. And a lot of it is because of the virtual. On the one hand, it's wonderful. We can be in touch with people all the time. Maybe we're in touch with people too much of the time, and it's not a real interaction. We've forgotten how to really sit across another person, look into their eyes, communicate without phones. Now look, I'm talking to you, my phone is right next to me. There's research that found that married couples have less sex when the phone is next to their bed than when it's not. So just the presence of these devices inhibits sexuality, inhibits interaction, human to human interaction. I do think that's a problem. We're becoming more comfortable with devices and with technology than we are with humans. And that's coming, and that's manifesting itself in the sexual lives of people, or the absence of it.
If we just go back to the porno issue, you discuss a very interesting case of Philip that you treated, a 50 years old married man who is addicted to porn. And
Yes.
turning point was where his daughter occurred when she opened her laptop and found a pornographic image. Can you tell us more about this case?
This was a very interesting case. He came to me for porn addiction. And very successful man, very, very wealthy, successful in his career, but he was finding himself unable to concentrate on anything. In between, you know, at work, he was on the porn sites all the time. At home, he would go into the bathroom all the time, his laptop, and he was careless one time. And this is, by the way, this is how many of these 9 to 11-year-olds who are exposed to pornography, they're not necessarily looking for it. Often it's on one of the adults' computers or phones that they then are exposed, because some of the adults are careless. This happened with Philip, and his daughter saw him, you know, took his iPad and saw this image of pornography, and she was shocked and she was disappointed, and she wrote him and said, she said something to him about it and how she was disappointed in him, and that woke him up. That became a turn. I mean, obviously he was a little awakened before that because he sought my help. So he was already knowing that this was a problem. It was taking over his life. But when his daughter, when he saw that mirrored in his daughter and in his daughter's reaction, and he saw that he could be doing harm to other people in this way, that was a real turning point.
You write an interesting point that children that are picking up to their laptops parents, it's the new primal sin, the new exposure to the sex of their parents.
Of adult sex. Right. Before it was, you know, they would walk into the parents' bedroom or hear the parents. Now these parents aren't having sex. They're having sex, each one on their laptops or the thing. And so that becomes the new primal scene, and that the bedroom door is open. You know, all a child needs to know is how to get online.
Danielle, can you expand a little more what you learned about porno, and is porno the result of the changes in our sexuality, or does porno change our sexuality? It's the cause or the result, and what should it be as a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, what from your point of view is important that we will be informed with?
I think it's both. You know, porn, obviously it comes from what people want, what people imagine. Anything that you can imagine, it's in porn. There are so many different types of pornography. As I said, many of them are politically incorrect. Now, you all know that there's the internet, the World Wide Web, and there's the dark web. The dark web is, you can only be accessed kind of circuitously, and it has the darkest desires of people. People sell organs on the dark web. They sell weapons on the dark web. It was initially created for military purposes, to have, you know, safe, to have it be safe. But the dark web now, 80% of the dark web is child pornography. So people can access that. It's amazing how popular child pornography is. So that's in the dark web. But in the regular web, like Pornhub is the most used and popular internet pornography site. And that's the one that has 1 billion visits a day in the world. So that's a lot. What did I learn about it? You're gonna laugh. I'm the researcher, right? I've never been on porn web, but my students have. My students love, all the students want to be my research assistants because they find it's pretty interesting stuff. So I have them, you know, go on these sites and report back to me. I know that, you know, how popular it's become, how it's spiked. It's gone up 22% since COVID, the visits. on porn. So it comes from our imagination, obviously, whatever we want, whatever we desire, whatever is forbidden in society, there has to be a place where it can be enacted and watched and participated in. What I've learned is the thing that surprised me the most was just how politically incorrect the internet porn is. So that you have racist porn, and you have, you know, obviously pedophilia. You have, so now with COVID, there's COVID porn now. I've discovered. Really? Yes, yes. Do you want to know about it?
What is it, a COVID porno?
I'll tell you. You know, because of COVID, people have developed a fear of sex. A fear of touching, a fear of contamination, a fear of infection, a fear of kissing, a fear of breathing on someone. All the things that happen during sex, during a sexual encounter. There's less privacy because the kids are home if people are parents. So people have avoided sex even more. So the COVID themed porn, they have people wearing masks, they have people wearing gloves, the hazmat suits, those hazmat suits, and somehow how they have sex, I don't know, but apparently there are. So anything that creates a limit to our desires, right? Whatever in society is saying you can't do this, or you shouldn't do this, or this is wrong, you will find that in internet porn, okay? Because we don't like limits. We basically, we want what we want. We don't want those limits. And so we have to find ways to satisfy that, to break through. So perversion and technology, I write about both technology and perversion, both have in common the desire to break through limitations. Wherever humans are limited, think about what is technology. It's breaking through and saying, I can do this, I will do this. And the same thing with perversion. You telling me I can't do it? I'll find a way, right? So pornography is this big playground. I call it pornocopia. It's a playground for people to do whatever they're told they can't do and they shouldn't do. And that's where you find it.
So if I understand you correctly, what you say is that concurrently, on the same time, we are going through the Me Too and politically correctedness, and at the same time, the desires and the drives are in the dark internet, like it's a split.
It's a complete split, and you have both at the same time, exactly. And the more you have one, the more you have the other, right? Because we have an antisocial part of us. We have a part of us that doesn't want to be told what to do, that doesn't want to be told, that rebels against, right? And even Jack Morin, who wrote a book called The Erotic, what was it called? The Erotic Imagination or something. He defined sexual excitement as attraction plus obstacle. That's what excites us. Just attraction, that can be okay for a little while, but the obstacle, if you put an obstacle in there, the excitement rises. So we look for that, the obstacle. The obstacle can be anything. It can be someone doesn't want you. It can be that society tells you that's not allowed. It can be that person is forbidden. They're already taken. Oh.
Or technology.
Exactly. So all of that, so attraction plus obstacle equals excitement. We don't think of that common sense. It's like, oh, you're attracted to this person, that's what you want. But why is the hard to get? Think to yourself, why do people want someone who's hard to get? Why do people want someone who's already taken? Why do people want a forbidden object, right? Incest pornography is very popular, by the way.
Daniel, I want to ask you something that interests me. When people see pornography, they obviously masturbating, and when they don't see pornography, they can masturbate having these films run in their own imagination. Does it make a very big difference if the movie is inside our head or is outside our head?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. A lot of the people who masturbate to the visuals, they stop doing it on their own. They become completely dependent on those visuals. The imagination has no end. You can go anywhere in your imagination. The pornography, you're still kind of watching what is presented to you. What happens when people get very used to using pornography is they might begin with soft pornography, what maybe Shalom would accept as normal pornography. And then, but what happens is that piece of the obstacle, people need more. And so then they start moving from the soft porn to harder porn, to more sadomasochistic porn, to more, and suddenly they find themselves in a dungeon porn that they didn't intend to in the beginning. But
and it narrows the imagination.
It narrows the imagination.
Do you think it can
more and more to get excited, just like a drug with drug addicts too. You need more and more to get that high. And it's the same thing with porn addiction.
And do you think it can also trigger the potential sex offender, that he starts for pornography and then offends, for example, children?
Well, that's always been the question, and people have been asking this question a lot. It's split thoughts about this. Some people say, what they see is what they see. It doesn't necessarily translate into action. Other people say if they're seeing it all the time, it can give them ideas about what's possible in real life. There's one analyst who I mentioned in the book who studied and found that some men who began pretty innocent porn ended up in the end watching pedophilic porn, child porn. And without that being a previous interest of theirs. Mm-hmm. So it can kind of move from something relatively innocent to upping the ante.
Danielle, I would like to show you.
We have a question from the audience here from someone who said that from his observation, the men who see pornography, it doesn't start from excitement and sexual excitement and desire, but from distress and boredom. That's what triggers the pornography.
Well, I don't think you can generalize. It could be one of the reasons people go to pornography. I have a patient now who he's a procrastinator. And so one of the things when he has a task, a job-related task, he'll go to pornography to distract himself. So people go to pornography for different reasons, to enliven, to distract, to have sex. But many people are married. They have a partner. It's not just someone who's living alone and doesn't have a partner and therefore, goes to pornography. No, many of these people have partners with whom they're not having sex, but they're having, they're masturbating to the pornography.
I would like to share with you, Danielle, Ellie from the audience. First, I want to say that some people in the audience would like us to go to the issue of gender fluidity, and we promise them that we will soon go there. But before,
yes, pornography is very compelling here.
Ellie from the audience is asking, I'm reading, it means that sexuality can be a kind of insurrection. I'm not sure what is insurrection.
Insurrection.
Yeah, against culture. In this case, it has little to do with sexual drive and more with subversive individuality. Do you agree?
I think Freud would agree. I think that there's definitely something to that it is an antisocial, activity, but it's not just pornography, it's sexuality in general. Yeah, but not only. Again, we have to be careful not to take one example or one phenomenon and generalize it and say, this is what it is for everybody. Because everybody's sexuality is quite unique. And especially as therapists, it behooves us to explore everybody's unique sexuality, to get a sexual history from somebody, to know what they're doing online. If somebody says they masturbate to porn, ask them, what kind of porn do you watch? Which sites? Who are you identifying with? It's not obvious. They might be, people, and you might think, oh, they're identifying. No, they're identifying with somebody else, right? So how much time do they spend online on these things? So don't be afraid to ask those things. You will discover a lot about your clients if you get into their online life. Gender. What do you want to know about gender?
Well, I want to open the subject of gender because there is a dramatic change between how Freud understood the issue of gender and how today we understand it. Like feminist psychoanalysts and queer postmodern theories like Muriel Diamond and Judith Butler and Adrienne Harris. There are strong critiques of classical gender theory. And can you, for our viewers, tell us briefly what this change is all about?
Okay. Yeah, this is one area that has changed dramatically just in the last few decades. But let's begin with Freud. So for Freud, during Freud's time, right, it wasn't just Freud, it's during that time, they saw gender as having two possibilities, male and female. They also saw sex as having two possibilities, gay and straight, right? And they considered gay perverse, right? Although Freud did not. Freud did not consider homosexuality as a perversion because he felt we all had that within us. So this was it. You were born either a male or female, and then that determined what your gender was. If you were born male, your gender was male. If you were born female, your gender was female. And so it was simplistic and binary. It was binary, one or the other. Today, we have many people who identify as non-binary, meaning what? It's not just trans. It began with, let's say, the transsexual movement. Today we call transgender as the umbrella term for all people who don't want to identify according to the binary, either transgender or queer, right? They're against this binary division and attribution of gender. And so now we have all kinds of gender identifications that you have still the people who, let's say, are born male, biologically male, and wish to be female or identify as female. And so they still see the binary. So many transgenders still identify according to the binary. They just feel that they are the other gender, right? But many people do not identify necessarily as the other. They might be somewhere in between, or they don't even want to be identified at all. They talk about gender fluidity, right? That you can move from one to the other. They talk about gender creativity. You can create your own gender, right? That there's a creative aspect to gender, an illusory even aspect to gender.
And for example, a transvestite, what we call, yes, or transsexual, what we call, is from the old definition of binary, that he feels that he should choose. He can't be the biological sex that he was born. He has to choose and replace it. Where you, well, the new gender theories say that you don't have to choose. You can be flexible. You can be someday this and someday that.
You don't have to choose. We talk about gender fluidity, gender flexibility, non-binary gender. I mean, on Facebook today, when you identify your gender on Facebook, there are 60 choices, 60. Okay. On Tinder, which is the most popular dating app, there are 40 choices. So I don't even know what they all are, but that's a lot. And I'm sure that some people would come up with more. So it just shows where we've come from 2 to 60, right? From 2 male, female to 60.
But so, what are the implications of this fluidity for our sexual life and for our mental life? What do you believe?
Whatever people make of it, I think the implication is that we have to broaden our idea of what people. So for some people, the implications are that gender is very important. It's very central, and it determines nearly everything they do. For other people, they don't even want gender considered. It's like, I'm a human. That's all you should care about. I'm human, and let me play with my gender the way I wish. And so again, it's more individualized. But in the more social realm, it means we have to broaden our idea of what we use, especially for the older generations. And I include myself in this, that we have to broaden our idea of what gender is and can be, that there's more of a fluidity to gender. There's a multiplicity to gender, and that the binary. Now, there's still a place for the binary. Many people identify with the gender that they were born into or raised as, and these are now called cisgender, CIS, cisgender. So you identify, you accept the gender that you were born assigned to at birth. And so the majority of people still are in that category, and certainly around the world, but at the same time, there are more and more, especially young people, but not only, who are saying, I don't like this strict gender categorization. So in the same way that I was saying sexuality is antisocial and wants to break through limits, people are wanting to break through the limits that gender has caused, them. And so they don't want those limits anymore. And they want to identify themselves the way they want to identify themselves. So this is a very big change in the last 20 years.
Do you feel that mainstream psychoanalysis has incorporated this change? Because many analysts grew up in those traditional theories of Freud and Klein. Did they adjust themselves to this new landscape, sexuality landscape?
Well, I think there's a generational difference. And I think people of an older generation really have to get with the program, because otherwise they are going to pathologize their patients. And we have to keep up with the changes for, and that's one of the things that drove me to do my research, to conduct my researches and to write this book, particularly for psychoanalysts. It's like, we have to know what's going on with people. And when we get these people in treatment, to not instantly think, oh, this person is not accepting their gender, there's something wrong with them, or this person is not, right? We have to adapt to changing times. Just like homosexuality was considered a perversion, and then we had to adapt. Even though Freud didn't think of it that way, well, now everybody's apologizing for having thought that way, because now it seems clear to most people that this is not the case. And so, and that we were mistaken in our theories, right? And so I think the same thing has to happen with gender, that we consider gender a much more rigid category than it actually is. That we all have male and female, and we all can be somewhere in between. I mean, Jung saw that with the anima and animus, right? So there always were some theories that were more open about gender fluidity, but never like today. And so I think the implication is that there is a generational difference. When I sometimes consult with parents of transgendered children, and they're lost. They say, how can it be? They're just not accepting their sexuality, their gender. And a lot of what I do is translate from one generation to the other, you know, so that they at least understand where each one is coming from, and then can have some empathy for each other and meet in between.
Danielle, from your research, is gender fluidity a characteristic of certain parts in the society? Is it more, can we find it more in Manhattan than in other places, in Tel Aviv than in other places? Is it related to socioeconomic status? Do you find, or maybe, how is it, are these changes happening in the same form in different parts of the world?
That's a good question. What's the social component here? I would say that it probably, we're seeing this more in more urban, you know, environments. A lot of it is more in the higher social classes. A lot of it is with whites. A lot of it is, the majority are white people. But not only, again, this is a statistic. We see there's some contagion effect that we're starting to see, where, you know, young people, especially the females who now want to transition to male, that it's happening kind of in groups, where one influences another, So what the psychological component is here is, and the social component is still, we're just learning about this. And so if you get somebody in treatment, I mean, you have to explore this with them. How do they see their gender? Why has their gender become unacceptable to them? How do they see, you know, identify their gender? What does it mean to them? We are, you know, we're meaning-making creatures. Psychoanalysis is very much identified with making meaning. And so all of these areas, whether it has to do with gender or sexuality, has to do with making meaning and use of the imagination. How do we use our imaginations to make meaning, to create gender, to make ourselves attractive or attracted to someone else? And that's really what we do.
If I understand correctly, this is where you believe psychoanalysis is getting in making the meaning of the forms of sexuality, the gender patterns or the gender identifications. Another issue is the issue of monogamy and polyamory. Do you see it in this? do you think that the changes in the, or now polyamory is much more accepted? Do you think it comes from the same place as the gender fluidity?
Well, I don't know the exact same place, but it does come from a place of opening things up, not accepting what is, or what the older generation says is, or what society is telling us is. You know, in the past, in my training, we were trained to think that pathology meant not being able to accept reality, right? So if somebody presented as a male and they wanted to be female, we would say, well, there's a pathology there. They can't accept the reality of their bodies. Today, we're looking at these things differently. And, you know, well, they don't accept it. They want to create what they want their bodies to be, or what they want their genders to be, or how they want to be treated by the gender. So it's gender and sexuality aren't exactly the same, but what comes from the same place is this desire to break down limits and to say, we're going to live the way we want. We want to define ourselves. We want to be with whom we choose to be, right? So there's a real opening of sexuality. I don't know how popular polyamory is in Israel. Is there a movement there for it?
Yes, it's quite popular, I think.
Really?
It is becoming much more, and the politically correctedness now is to say that it's normal as monogamy. Like I don't know if it's true for all kind of groups in the society, but in the psychotherapeutic community, it becomes more politically correct to see all forms as normal.
Yeah, and this too is a problem. Like people who are trained in couples therapy or family therapy. We were trained with you know, husband wife. All of a sudden now, or even, you know, a gay couple, gay or lesbian couple, and now I'm working with arrangements that involve more than two people. And so these theories and approaches that we were trained in don't apply the same way to them. So we have to change our theory. We have to get up to speed here with all of these changes that are taking place in society.
So we will be more fully informed. What do you mean by the concept of new sexualities or new forms of sexuality?
Well, you know, some of them are not new, like bisexuality, polyamory, sadomasochism. These are not new, but they've become more popular and more public, right? What is new is technosexuality, digisexuality, cybersexuality, all of the types of sexuality that are connected to technology. Those are new because we didn't have the technology before. And so those are new forms of sexuality. And even, yeah, I was going to say, does gender fit into that? No, not yet.
But about gender, Danielle, we used to think that, you know, Freud's theory that everyone was born bisexual, and
Yes.
then we have to go through a process of mourning.
Yes.
Decide which sides, decide one of the sides. And what you're actually saying is that in the new sexual landscape with its fluidity, you don't have to mourn anymore, and you don't have to decide anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and you can choose and then change your mind, and you can move. Yes, yeah, that was the old way, that you had to, and it wasn't so much a decision. It could be a decision, but often it wasn't a choice. It was just what one felt. But one would mourn the loss of the other choice, right? So Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex, right? How do we resolve the Oedipus complex? The Oedipus complex has a positive side and a negative side, which shows our bisexuality. But the resolution of it is that you accept that you cannot have what you cannot have, and you cannot be everything, and you cannot have everything. Right?
That's the reality principle.
The difference between the sexes, the difference between the generations. You can't have mom or dad. You can't have, you know, everything you want. Today's world, they say, why not? Why can't you? And so there's no mourning process. There's no loss. There's no, you know, so this is completely revolutionizing psychoanalytic theory. If you think
the problem that I have with it, that without mourning and without sorrow and without reality principle that you must adhere to and you must realize it, there is no growth. There is no mental growth. There is no reverie. You know, everything, you can have everything. You can be anything you want. So
well, it's like what Freud said. How does the ego develop? Through frustration. So if a parent does everything for the child doesn't learn how to do something, right? And so the ego develops from the challenges. Wait a minute, I don't have, mom's not here, so what am I going to do to get my needs met, right?
But maybe there is another kind of frustration. Maybe frustration changes forms, because even if you are in the position of I can be whatever, there are no limitations, so you become FOMO, you are afraid of missing opportunities, you became loaded. So there is frustration is very
it's hard to avoid. It's hard to avoid frustration, because even if you think you can have everything and be everything, that's an illusion. We are limited. And if our biggest limitation is that we age, we get sick, and we die, those are limitations. And many of these rebellions against limitations are against the largest limitation, which is our mortality, right? But I agree with you. So even in my polyamorous arrangements, they have jealousies. They have, you know, how do we do this? Who's allowed to sleep with whom and when, and which conditions, and which, suddenly there are all these conditions. You know, you can only sleep with this one, but only one time, and only if I don't know the person, and only if it's someplace in a different city, and only if so suddenly what they wanted was everything's allowed, but then the limitations come in eventually. So we're always playing with freedom and limit in some way or another.
Yes, and speaking of Freud, in the book you refer to a patient named Anna, which I like you to discuss a bit, because she was raised as a male, but since childhood identified as female, and she regarded everything male with hatred.
Yes.
And, she's completely reversed Freud's ideas about her male castration fears and penis envy.
Penis envy, yes. She desired castration. That was the thing she wanted the most, and hated, you know, hated the penis. So she turned everything upside down. In fact, she used to do things in my office without me knowing it. She would take a book on my shelf and turn it upside down, or she would take the toilet paper. And, you know, people have preferences, whether it comes from above or from below. She would turn it around. And it was a kind of gaslighting. So I thought, you know, wait a minute, wasn't this way? And wasn't this? And finally, I figured out that it was Anna who was doing this. And I confronted her and she said, yes, I want you to experience the world the way I do, with everything upside down or reversed.
Danielle, can you share us a little bit, because we are near the end of our conversation, the issue of cyber sex, technology and sex, robots.
Oh my gosh, this is a huge topic. People are using sex, technology more and more to satisfy their desires. And particularly, as I mentioned before, as people are moving away from the human, and that's happening in our whole society, but as people are moving away from the human and human interactions, they're turning towards technology. So in my previous book, you know, I did a research on men who live with dolls, sex dolls, but not just to have sex. They develop relationships with these dolls. They consider the dolls their intimate partners. Some of them marry the dolls. And so this has replaced, you know, relations with people. So now they're developing robots for the same purpose, sex robots. David Levy, who is a roboticist and artificial intelligence expert, he predicts that in 40 years, we're going to be marrying robots. And so this is a trend that is moving. And so if you have trouble accepting the gender fluidity and the forms of sexuality, this is something.
What is the extent of cyber sex or sex with dolls? Is it frequent?
It's growing. It's growing. Cyber sex is much more frequent. People, they're developing all kinds of teledildonics, what's called teledildonics, where people can have sex with another person when they're not together. So they wear these outfits, and one through the computer can stimulate the other person, and they feel it in their bodysuits, in the spot that the other person is stimulating. So these are, you know, it's nice for people who don't live in the same town or in the same country, but people are choosing, are developing these kinds of technologies so that sexuality is really going to move in these directions, using technology more and more for gratification and for overcoming different kinds of obstacles and reaching beyond. The breaking down limits and opposing limits also goes towards transcendence. It's where can we get to? Humans are always reaching for the skies. Look at Elon Musk, just, you know, sent a rocket to Mars. And we don't like limits. We want to reach out. And certainly that applies to our sexuality.
And what do you think of that? For example, what do you think of plastic vaginas? Do you think it's dehumanize female subjectivity?
Well, your plastic has been replaced with silicone. You have to keep up with the times. Silicone is very similar to skin, so the feel is very skin-like. But women have been using vibrators and dildos for many years, and that's the equivalent of, you know, the silicone vagina. These sex dolls, everybody who uses them swears that they are better than human because they have a form of suction that human females cannot imitate. So I think part of it is where the technology can bring, and part of it is that people are losing their human skills, their skills to be with another human being. And I don't mean just sexually. I mean just look at a dinner table and you see everybody is on their phones instead of talking to each other. I see young people, they sit in a circle, they're with each other and they're texting each other. They're next to each other physically and they're texting each other because they've become more comfortable texting than speaking.
Danielle, I am I would like to introduce Ron questions from the audience.
Okay.
Getting back to the question we introduced before, is technophilia related to mental pathology or more mental healthy? Or is it not necessarily related to pathologies? So do you see the technosex as inherently a pathology, or is it something normal that we have to get used to as the gender fluidity, or?
Well, again, the pathology question.
Yeah.
And I said I don't like that.
I know.
I think that initially, I think it can be both. I think it can be both. I think we are moving towards a more techno-friendly society. There's no question. How many of you feel comfortable without your phones? Probably zero. We've become attached, and we even eroticize the phone. There are friends, there are the partners, there are limbs, there, yeah. So we can't go back now from that place, and we're going to go forward. I can tell you, because I already see the seeds of it. It's moving forward. What I think is, rather than call it pathological, I call it, a shame, is when we replace the human to human connection with human to robot or device connection. However, I've met with many of these men, primarily men, although women will probably follow, who live with dolls, who call themselves robosexuals because they're more attracted to robots or dolls than to humans. And they're really nice people, a lot of them. And this assuages their loneliness. They feel that they can be satisfied. They're not alone. I'll read you just a little quote from the book of one man who I got to know very well, who has been with his doll for 20 years. And he says, at the end of the day, everyone deserves someone who they can love and who will unconditionally love them back. If that someone happens to be made of silicone flesh and metal joints, or assembled in a factory with a mechanical interior and advanced artificial intelligence, the sentiment remains the same. It's still a human sentiment to want that connection, whether you get it from a human or from a robot or a doll. So,
yes.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Danielle. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.
I learned a lot, and our landscape was challenged, and I think that you bring very important information to, if we speak psychoanalytically, to our consciousness. And
our clients. And our clients.
And I think
So
you widen our...
You can
So
see.
if you want more,
Thank you.
You can see on the chat the responses to our conversation.
Oh, good.
It will be accompanied by a special song we prepared for this day, an Israeli and Hebrew song that says that we need to have another sex.
A different sex.
Different sex.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, Havelock Ellis in the 1800s talked about the third sex, but nowadays people wouldn't be satisfied with 3. It has to.
Yeah. Infinite. Yeah, so for our English-speaking audience, the song, as Aner said, is speaking about the words are saying that we need to look for different sex, and the music is nice. Thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you.
It was enlightening.